Okay, let's. So I've been doing a lot of research and I've been trying to get information, and so I had a conversation with someone from a community legal pro bono thing about trying to start this process of challenging the validity of the government's mutual obligations regime. So so I'm trying to do that. So I was, started watching this video. AUW online advocacy course 1 part 1. So they were talking about the Commonwealth Employment Service. I think I went to this Commonwealth Employment Service. I think I did. So first, let's look at some of the things I've been. So this is Guides to Social Policy Law Social Security Guide, released 2nd January 2020. Some mutual obligation requirements for New Start Youth Allowance Job Seekers Overview. Okay, so these are some of the mutual obligations. Okay, so where is the relevant legislation? The relevant legislation is in the Social Security Administration Act 1999. Specifically, let's go to let's go to the mutual obligation. What is it? Oh, this is the termination of my marriage. Right. Okay, Division 3. I think it's Part 3, Division 3. Yeah, that's right. In the Social Security Administration Act 1999, Part 3, Division 3, commencement of Social Security payment, Division 3AA, compliance with participation payment obligations. Persons other than declared program participants. So declared program participants is like a category of participants, I think, who are in rural areas or remote areas, and most of them are Aboriginal people. So they've got a different. They're subject to even. That's even like some people say it's like a. There's some racism might be involved, like anyway, I don't want to go into that right now, but okay, so so this is like a 42AA. So let's talk about mutual obligation failures. A person commits a mutual obligation failure if the person is receiving a participation payment. So, for instance, a participation payment can be New Start allowance, which is this type of allowance I'm receiving currently, and any of the following applies. The person fails to comply with the requirement that was notified to the person under subsection 62.204. I don't want to look at that. Okay, the person fails to comply with the requirement under section this of the 1991 Act So the 1991 Act, what is that is the Social Security Act. This is the Social Security Administration Act. So if you, for instance, to enter into an employment pathway plan, so that's like that's like something. I don't know if they call it, that's the job seeker plan. Maybe that's the, when you go to the job agency, you have to write a document. Maybe that's what they're talking about. Right, that's, if you fail to sign that, you can have a mutual obligation failure. See, the person failed to attend or to be punctual for an appointment that the person is required to attend by 1. A notice under subsection 63(2), well, that's the same here, or an employment pathway plan that is in force in relation to the person. Oh, it's an appointment. D. The person fails to attend, to be punctual for or to participate in an activity that the person is required to undertake by an employment pathway plan that is in force in relation to the person. I think that's employment pathway plan. I think that's the job plan, I think. I'm not sure. But anyway, an employment pathway plan is in force in relation to the person, and the person fails to satisfy the secretary that the person has undertaken adequate job search efforts in relation to a period worked out in accordance with the plan. See subsection 2. So if you fail to do a number of job searches in your plan, that's a mutual obligation failure. An employment pathway plan is in force in relation to the person, and the person fails to comply with any of the requirement of the plan that applies to the person. So you can have some like other requirement that your job provider puts into the plan. I think that's what that means. G. The secretary certified that the person acted in an inappropriate manner. Alright. A. During an appointment to which paragraph C applies that the person attended or while participating in an activity referred to in paragraph D. So what is inappropriate manner? Where do they define inappropriate manner? Oh, that is pretty vague. Where is the definition? The person intentionally acts in a manner and it is reasonably foreseeable that acting in that manner could result in an offer of employment not being made to the person. So what does that mean? It's still very vague. What is in a manner? What is the manner? Give an example of the manner. I guess they don't want to define that, The person fails to attend a job interview or act on a job opportunity when requested to do so by an employment services provider. That's the job. In certain circumstances, the person taken to be receiving a participant payment even if it is not payable to the person. See section 4280. Okay. I'm just wondering, what is a adequate job search efforts? Anyway, so that's one of the obligations. Mutual obligation, that is one of the what you have to do, compliance, what you have to comply with if you are receiving a New Start allowance. Mutual obligation failures, work refusal failures, unemployment failures. Alright, so those are the three categories of obligation. Mutual obligation, three categories of what you have to do. Comply with the mutual obligation. You shouldn't refuse work. You shouldn't do something that'll lead to your unemployment. And what are the compliance actions that must be taken for particular failures? So if you fail, if you commit a mutual obligation failure, the compliance action for mutual obligation failures, usual rule, if a person commits a mutual obligation failure, the relevant authority must determine that the person's participant payment is not payable to the person for a period and take action on subsection 2 if applicable. This is for persistent and reasonable excuse. Reduce, so you can have your payment reduced for a period, or you can have your payment cancelled. So the two types of penalties. So there is some discretion not to apply the reduction of payment or these cancellation of payment under there is some discretion if there are some matters, relevant matters. Okay. So that's for mutual obligation failure. It seems like the usual rule or whatever. So there are two rules. The usual rule, you can have your payment actually is not payable. So you can have your payment suspended. There's a maximum, I think it's 4 weeks. That's the usual rule. Special rule is for persistent mutual obligation failures and no reasonable excuse. So there are two rules there. So you can have your payment reduced, or it can be cancelled. I think this is suspension, whereas if you persistently do it, you can have your payment cancelled or reduced. I think that's the difference there. And there is also a discretion not to take action for certain failures. But if your payment is already reduced to 0, then there's no further action to be taken. Alright, okay. So if you already had some kind of a suspension and you continue to make a failure during the period of suspension, there's no further action. Okay, so for work refusal, you can have, the usual rule is suspension of payment, but if you do not have a reasonable excuse, look at that. So if you refuse work and you have a reasonable excuse, you will have your payment suspended, right? However, if you refuse the work and you don't have any reasonable excuse, your payment is cancelled. Wow. So for unemployment failures, oh my goodness, your payment is cancelled. Okay. So this is what they mean by reasonable excuse for this. If you're going to for instance, not go to an appointment, you need to notify them prior notification. Okay, so this effective taking the payment suspension periods from which you obligate for work if it's failure. Reconnection. Reducing the payment for mutual obligation failures. So, if you, for instance, are in a job and then you do something that leads to you, I think they say losing the job. I think they say intentionally, and then you lose that job. They will suspend your no, they will cancel your payment, and I think this is saying you have to wait for 4 weeks before you can apply for your payment, I think. This is, they call it the unemployment preclusion periods for unemployment failures. Canceling participation payments. Anyway, so those are some of the things. Okay, this is for the people who are in remote areas. So I mean, that's just my understanding. I could be wrong in interpreting some of these things. Anyway, so that's the legislative provisions. So let's go to an interesting. After watching a little, I didn't watch the whole thing. I just watched a little bit. Let's just go to what happened. All right, this is an interesting article. Okay, so what happened was before. This is a very. I'm gonna actually show a slide that I've shown here. Right. So this is from this video. So, in 1989, the employment services was provided by the government. It was not in the private sector. And in 1989, the number of penalties imposed was so low it wasn't even recorded. However, he's saying in this video that both Labour and the coalition government, which is like the conservative government, they wanted to privatize this Commonwealth Employment Service. See, the Commonwealth Employment Service was an Australian government employment agency that was established in 1946. So it was like basically. It's like right now we have the private companies providing employment services. This was a public government agency providing employment services, and if you can see, the number of penalties imposed was so low, right? And they had a union, and the union was apparently fighting the government's attempt to privatize it. However, in 1997, when John Howard was elected, I think that's when they, I think that's when they broke up the agency or whatever, but they transferred this into a private thing. And as you can see, aside from the short dip here, in 2015, the total amount of penalties imposed was gone up to what? More than 250% from here. So because after the privatization of the job agency, the total penalties as a proportion of total unemployed went just skyrocketed. And here is a very good article. Commonwealth Employment Service. This is on the Independent Australia. Pitfalls of Privatization. This is written by Darren Rexter on 18 March 2018. The privatization of the Commonwealth Employment Service, CES, has failed. The largely unregulated $7.3 billion a year employment services industry is struggling to deliver quality services for both job seekers and employers. So this private industry that the government created is $7.3 billion a year. And that $7.3 billion is given by the government. The government spends $7.3 billion of taxpayer money. I know I don't pay taxes, but taxpayer money to it gives that money to these private companies, whose job it is the job of these private companies is to find work for unemployed people. More than a third of job agencies are performing so poorly that they should be ineligible to provide services, and only 20% of unemployed people are finding long-term work. It's time for a total rethink and the reintroduction of a government-run employment service, one that suits the needs of both job seekers and business and assists our nation in producing a highly skilled and productive workforce. Okay. The CEOs fell victim to the deregulation and privatization reforms of the 1990s and early 2000s. Governments of all persuasions argued that the market and competition would create a more efficient and economical way of delivering services. Its successor was Job Network. So after the successor to the Commonwealth Employment Service was Job Network, a group of charities and for-profit businesses that were assigned the task of helping job seekers into employment. There have been various reinventions of the scheme over its existence. Currently, we have Job Active right now. And like its predecessors, it is failing, with complaints skyrocketing and poor performance by providers going unchecked. Peter Strong, CEO of the Council of Small Business Australia, recently wrote a piece calling for the creation of a new Commonwealth Employment Service, stating that the privatized system was textbook-driven policy and has created a few millionaires off the back of the unemployed, while delivering a scheme that is probably delivering at the most minimal service. He also stated, quote, the private sector will always do a more efficient job, whatever, but many believe that no private sector organization should make a profit from the ills of the needy. That's right, they're making a profit of unemployed people. At the heart of the problem is that private providers exist to make money, the for-profit motive. Job seekers have been turned into commodities, with providers paid for various outcomes achieved for their clients, such as placing someone in a job or an activity like work for the Dole program. Most providers rely on low margins and high turnover to make a profit, and harder to place clients are often parked. Like me. I mean, I don't know if they are intentionally doing that, but I don't have any evidence that anyone parked me or whatever, but harder to place clients often parked, meaning target groups and harder cases receive little or no assistance to find sustainable employment. Why? Because they can use us. For instance, if they refer me to some kind of an activity like, let's say, enrolling in a course, I think that'll be counted as an outcome, and they will get money from the government for doing that. I think that's what it means, my understanding. This fact alone defeats the whole purpose of the scheme. Employment services should exist to ensure everyone has equitable access to economic opportunities. With the Salvation Army losing more than $1 million a month in the first 18 months of the latest version of the privatized system, it's little wonder that some providers have turned devious practices in order to stay afloat. In 2015, Four Corners reported that the federal government had received more than $41 million worth of false claims over a 3-year period. They found that the privatized system was vulnerable to exploitation, and fraudulent activity within the scheme was widespread. There have been reports of job agencies pushing people into fake jobs, manipulating attendance figures, foregoing signatures, and harassing clients for pay slips. I remember one of the job consultants saying she wanted pay slips. A former policy director and experiment services designer, Rob Church, has written that providers are, quote, shielded from public scrutiny by the commercial in confidence provisions in their contracts with the department, which is also protect them from freedom of information requests. This is a huge problem. This is a question I have, is because if the private job providers, if they're doing a government function, which is the Commonwealth Employment Service was a public department performing the function of employment service, right? Now the And I suppose you could make a freedom of information request to documents that the a public department holds. However, if the same function is performed by a private company, can you do what they're saying is this is going these commercial provisions in that job deed I was talking about, I think that's what they mean, prevent freedom of information requests. I think this should be challenged legally. I think there's a problem here. I don't think private companies which perform public functions such as employment services should be shielded from accountability. I think there's a real basis for challenging this, maybe. He also wrote that, quote, "It is a system replete with grand alibis for which none of the mutually dependent participants inside and outside government takes overall responsibility." It's like the government is, I sort of glanced at the job deed, and the government is a real, sounds like a real jerk. Oh, my throat is so dry. The pressure to turn a profit, and with many staff within the system having no more than a high school education, has led to many job seekers being bullied and harassed by those assigned to assist them. And this is for that community development program, I think. Indigenous work for Dole scheme hits participants with more than 400,000 fines in July 2015. Time to scrap harsh discriminatory work for the Dole scheme that compels remote job seekers to work 3 times longer than their city-based peers. Stories of service of providers attempting to force women with high-risk pregnancies into work for the Dole program. Terminally ill people being harassed for not looking for work, people who make complaints given tougher regimes of activities and appointments. And refugees being treated with disrespect. The Australian Unemployed Workers Union was formed and created a much-needed advocacy service to fill this gap due to the common occurrence of inappropriate behavior in staff and the government department's interest in protecting the providers. How awful! Rather than assisting vulnerable job seekers. Yeah. So there are and major social unemployment stakeholders from small those. It is time to admit that this experiment in privatization has failed, and for those currently in power, along with future governments, to return to one of its main responsibilities, helping unemployed Australians to secure well-paid jobs at the world-class public service. I think I better shut up. My brother wants to sleep anyway. It was outrageous. Anyway, so there's another article here. Private sector operators. This seems like a good video. It's on the YouTube channel. I was looking for, so I've been trying to do some research on this. I've been looking at cases like a challenge. There are a lot of people who've been trying to challenge these things. Anyway, my mouth is, look at my I'm not taking care of myself. Grooming. Anyway. I think I'll end it there. There's this really good video where they're talking about actually I was contacting I was in contact with someone from the parliament, and I was asking if I can have permission to upload segments of the videos to my YouTube channel. They said yes, but I wanted more clarification, and because they have some rules on how you can use the rules on media who take videos on parliament grounds. Anyway, I'll end it for now. Yeah.